Good afternoon, everyone. It's Graham Roper here again for episode 5. It sounds like a soap opera, really, doesn't it? But anyway, we'll take episode 5, and just a bit of some explanations and coaching, and to help understand risk management, what it means for you, and some practical ways to manage risks in the environment. Just a wee thing just around our company, and the most thing that we're most proud of, obviously, is the million hours of zero harm amongst our clients. And I've worked exceptionally hard to do that, but actually found it has added value to their business. So what we were talking about today is what is risk management, the perplexing question, hazards versus risk. And that's a key thing to also get your head around and understand. The old adage of minimise, isolate and eliminate, what that means. Also, under the new Health and Safety Act, who can stop work based on a potential risk? And this is a very important point for everybody to understand. And so that's why we'll talk a little bit about it today. And then the requirement to document your risk management processes. So what is risk management? Well, it is essentially identifying what can cause harm in your workplace. So this is harm to individuals. The important thing to understand, the good thing about the new Health and Safety Act is risk management is the responsibility of every individual. A company and managers can provide the framework to manage risk, but it's really important that everybody understands that they are responsible for managing their own risk. So in other words, wherever I am is where the risk is. And conversely, it might sound strange, if I'm not there, I don't have to manage and understand risk. The other part about managing risk is that we can only manage risks that we can control. There are many things that we come across that you may see as a hazard or other things that are risky. If you can control them, there's a requirement to put some control measures in place. But obviously, if you don't know what you don't know, you can't manage that risk. Now, the Health and Safety at Work Act talks about all reasonably practicable steps in managing risk. The old Act said all practicable steps. So reasonably practicable is, it's not that clear in the Act, but what it does say is that you weigh it up, and you put the cost associated with managing that risk in the process. So an example might be a chimney sweep who climbs on the roof of a house and is up there for an hour will require some form of fall arrest harness, as opposed to a roofing contractor on the same roof being there for several days. Their risks are much greater, so therefore the risk controls will be much greater, and that might involve scaffolding and so on. So that is the good part about the Act, is that you're able to look at the risk, weigh it up in terms of the potential outcome for harm, and then work towards eliminating, if you can, that harm. Now, one of the hardest things we've had to come across was the statement about hazard versus risk. And the team here came up with a terminology, a thing, and it actually makes sense. So a hazard is a thing, often an inanimate object that could be dangerous. A risk is the result of the thing being dangerous. The result is the harm created when humans interact with a thing. Now that's the important stuff. There's a a slide coming up when we'll talk more about the thing, if they like, hazards versus risk. But it's really important to understand the focus is on the human contact or the individual contact with something that will cause harm. Until we have that clearly in our mind and everybody understands that, then the process of reducing harm won't take place. We know by the Pike River Inquiry and many others that producing a whole lot of documentation does nothing at all to reduce the risk. Certainly identifies all the hazards, but while people are reading pages and pages of documents which make their eyes glaze over, they miss the key points of the things that will hurt them. It creates the distractions. The most common one that we find now is you can go onto YouTube and look at the distractions when people are looking at their phones while crossing the road or walking down a street, and what they walk into and find. But quite possible that the app that they're looking at on their phone might be the directions to get from point A to point B, and while they're busy looking at directions, they fail to manage the risk of walking into something. So they're distracted by paperwork, for example. So the Health and Safety at Work Act changes the focus from recording and monitoring hazards to managing the risks, the things that will harm you. The minimise, isolate and eliminate has been around for many, many years and it still applies, but it applies again to risk. So when you're looking at doing a risk assessment or evaluating a risk, we want to achieve one of these three, and we always strive for the highest degree of risk management, which is eliminate, so removing the source of harm. An example of that is quad bikes. Says children shouldn't ride quad bikes. We'll then eliminate the ability for children to ride the quad bikes. It's as simple as that. Isolate, so that would be restricting the access to a particular area that could cause harm. The most common one of those is guarding around machinery. So the guarding is there is to isolate the possibility of somebody, because you can't eliminate the need for those spinning wheels, whatever they might do, but you isolate them from the ability to stick their limbs where they shouldn't be put. And minimising is obviously the lowest form. Is there are some things that you just cannot isolate or eliminate. So you need to minimise the potential risk, and that often involves ensuring that the operator understands the risk, knows how to mitigate any risk and keep themselves safe. The ever popular documenting of risk management processes or any risk management processes. On the system that you have, you'll find this form called a General Risk Assessment, SSSP or an SSP. Now, different organisations have different terminologies for the same form. So it's a General Risk Assessment form, or a site-specific safety plan, or a site-specific plan. So rather than have three different forms, we've just titled one form, but they all meet and require the filling out. And this is just a document to help you assess any risk and record it. You can also, if it's on something that is a very quick job to do, then you can use the activity report for the same purpose. It's got a tick box for SSSP. You just tick that box and you just make notes that you've looked at something, you've assessed the risk, and you've taken any actions that are required. And it's only and that's all that's actually required. But when you've got a bigger job and takes longer time, there's a requirement to do it in a bit more detail. But the key point is that you must stop and assess the risk. A few months ago now, I was over on the West Coast, and there were some builders on the roof of a pitched roof, and they had a brand new set of harnesses and ropes and hard hats. When I was talking to them, I just had a wee chat to them. It turned out that the person had just done a height course, building contractor, had done the height course, and the employer had provided new harnesses and ropes and everything else. But it's not funny ha-ha, but funny peculiar. I asked him what he was tied off to, and he kind of joked at me and says, well, actually, he was so busy putting all the harnesses on and doing all the right things according to paperwork, he actually hadn't tied off to anything at all. So all his new harnesses and everything else were about as much use as pockets in your underpants. And had it fall, it wouldn't have done anything at all. But it did reflect that process where people fill out, tick the boxes, put on all the gear, and it almost stops them from thinking in a common sense way of how do I prevent myself from being harmed. The next morning I was out there and on the roof, and the same person was on the roof, and he called me over and he advised me that he was tied off, and he tied off to the truck. But before I could say anything about tying off to the truck, he yelled down to me that I was not to worry because he had the keys to the truck in his pocket. Now, this is managing risk. This is a person who took the time to think about, I need to anchor to something secure, and the truck was the most secure thing. But then they also took that time to think about, well, what if somebody drove off in the truck? How do I manage that risk? So they did that by taking the keys out, and he had them in his pocket so nobody could move the truck. Now that's managing risk. That's understanding what can harm you and how you can prevent some harm being created. Now it might be technically correct if you tick some boxes, but it was a very secure anchor point and it couldn't move. That's the behaviour, and that's what managing risk is about, is managing behaviour and thinking about what might harm you. So who can stop work based on risk? So any employee or worker, as determined, and worker and contractor are one of the same thing in the Act. At any level can stop work and require all work to be stopped. Now there's a part in the Act that is very clear, and that comes from Pike River. Again, it was identified that the miners themselves, in Volume 2, Chapter 13 of the inquiry, identified that miners themselves were covering up methane sensors and so on. So their behaviour didn't match the paperwork. But what happens in the new Act, it says if anyone in that situation where methane levels were knowingly very, very high, could have said, no, the harm is too great, we will stop work. Now, an employer or PCBU cannot penalise anybody from doing that. What a PCBU or an employer must then do is investigate the risk and ensure that the risk is managed and in such a way that it is safe to return to work. So a person can't just say, right, it's Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, here's a risk, we're all going home for the day. There must be an opportunity to resolve the issue. And it is about preventing or creating a situation where everybody knows that something terrible can happen, but nobody feels in a position they can do anything. And that's very, very clear in the Act, and that every person has that right to do that. So I talked before about an example of the difference between hazards and risk. Now, the image on the left is obviously a quad bike, well, I hope it is, or it could be a motorbike. And the image on the right is a very large rock. Now, think about the rock. So a quad bike is no more of a hazard than a rock if it's placed in a paddock and there's nobody on it. So a quad bike and a rock create the same risk in a paddock as anything else that's stationary within a paddock. The risk becomes when you put a human or an individual or individuals with those potential risks that you see there. So it'll be quad bike and a rock. Now, if I was to run headlong into a rock without a helmet, it will hurt. If I was to run headlong into a quad bike, it will hurt. I don't think we'd debate that. Quad bikes are not hazardous. They're no more hazardous than a rock. What creates the risk is the operator. So if the operator, in this case of a quad bike or any piece of machinery, does not follow the proper processes to ensure that that piece of machinery is operated in a safe manner, it will hurt them. So managing the risk in this situation is managing the behaviour of the person operating the quad bike, or managing the behaviour of the person operating any kind of machinery. And if they fail to operate the machinery as it's meant to be operated, it will hurt them. But as a PCBU, you're required to manage that behaviour, and they are required to manage that behaviour. And incidentally, any other worker seeing behaviour that could put themselves or others at harm are required to manage that behaviour. So that's the fundamental difference between the old Act and the new Act. Puts the emphasis on individuals managing the risk. So a quad bike will not harm people unless they operate it outside of its safe operating processes. A guillotine will be the same, and so it goes on. A ladder will be the same. And so they're inanimate objects, they're things that do no harm until such time as we interact with them. And understanding that is the fundamental principle of the new Health and Safety at Work Act. Managing the risk. When you have a risk to manage, record it in some way, what you found and what controls, as I talk about, you put in place to manage that risk, whether it be to minimise, isolate or eliminate those risks, but understanding it in context of the reasonably practical aspects of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Just also keep in the back of your mind that the result of an incident is that paperwork is required, and it's a simple premise in any kind of investigation or legal process or anything else, is if it's not written down, it hasn't happened. So you can argue that you said this and you said that and you told them this and you told them that, without some form of record. It doesn't have to be long and convoluted, but some form of record of what was done and how it was done is absolutely paramount to ensure that you can demonstrate that you thought about it and put some controls in place where necessary. So again, just a bit of the 4-hour health and safety processes, and if you have yourselves or others who you wish to refer us to, just a reminder there that for 1 to 9 employees, it's $85 plus GST per month, and it's an annual fee. And 10 or more employees, the base cost is $95 per month as a monthly fee, or you'll see the total cost there. That covers all the basic requirements of the Act, helping to set up inductions and so on. There are no hidden costs in that. The only thing that does change, obviously, is if specialised investigations or something are required, but that's always quoted before any commencement. So there's just some background, and I hope you found it useful to understand why the Health and Safety at Work Act changed. The change is based on behaviour, ensuring we have behaviour changes. Behaviour changes aren't about pieces of papers and documents and all the rest of it. It's about engagement. It's about ensuring people understand that the role that they play and keeping themselves free of harm. Once again, thank you for taking the time to listen to the webinar. I hope you found it useful. And as always, feel free to contact us, any of the team, with any questions you may have or any further assistance we can provide for you. And once again, thank you very much.